Welcome to Upstream, where we make your worldview bigger and older by taking hard questions to the headsprings of Christian wisdom. I'm Shane Morris. I'm not the person I used to be, I hear and read again and again. I can't read a book anymore. I can't enjoy the things I used to. My hobbies feel boring. I feel my phone vibrating in my pocket, even when it's not there. People describe me as a different person in real life than I am on Twitter. I can feel my brain changing. These and similar observations have become common among the more self-aware columnists and commentators in the 2020s, and they all point back to the same thing as the culprit, the internet. Again and again, observers return to this theme that online life is somehow changing the very nature of our minds, making us all less happy, less whole, and in control of ourselves. In important ways, less human. Today I'm going to talk with one such Christian writer who has keenly observed this trend for years, has heard these troubling observations, and thinks the simple answer is, they're right. The internet is changing us, and for the worse. Samuel James is the Associate Acquisitions Editor at Crossway, and a writer and blogger I've followed and learned from for a long time now. He's just written a book called Digital Liturgies, Rediscovering Christian Wisdom in an Online Age. And we're going to dive deep into his argument today. Samuel James, welcome back to Upstream.
Thanks, Shane. It's great to be back.
When did you first realize you needed to write this book? What event or series of events in your life kind of prompted it?
So in 2020, summer of 2020, I was sitting on my in-laws' patio. I remember it pretty distinctly. And I finished Nicholas Carr's book, The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. Published in 2010, was I think a finalist for the Pulitzer, and ended that book and realized that if what Nicholas Carr had said in that book was true, then the theological implications were massive. And I wasn't able to think of anybody that I knew kind of in my theological tribe who was pointing this out. I think there was no kind of conversation going specifically about the theological implications of what he was saying. And so I just kind of stewed on that for several months and threw myself into reading to see if there was, between kind of Christian anthropology and media studies, to see if what Carr had kind of dug up was kind of thematically uniting some of this material, and there was a coherent theological picture that could be brought out to bear, and there was. And so that kind of led not so much to a feeling of, hey, I've got a really smart idea. I want to try to write a book and get it published and all that. It was more, hey, there are these other thinkers who have done a lot of work on this topic, but a lot of it is secular. The Christian thinking is kind of implying the implications, but they're not spelling it out. And so what if I took the work of Nicholas Carr, the work of Neil Postman, the work of Marshall McLuhan, and I made it talk to these Christian anthropological principles? Would that maybe get the conversation going in the direction that I wanted it to go? And so that's kind of what led to the conversations and the skeleton of the book. So I tell people there's really nothing uniquely insightful in this book to me. Like I'm not making this up. I didn't come up with this. This book is really resourcement, making what I believe to be a theologically and philosophically and experientially provable observation about media, making that speak to our theological categories in a way that I think is clarifying for a lot of people.
I think the best books are always a sort of exercise in connecting dots that are already out there. So authors feel like everybody should be able to look at those dots, those different books, those observations, those writers, those theologians in this case, and draw the connections and say, okay, here's how it all fits together and here's how it applies to this subject of the internet. But a lot of times those, connections aren't as obvious as the author thinks they are. And that's where the value of the book lies. It's in finding that lacuna, if you will, that needs to be filled up. And in this case, it seems to me, if I may say so, that the lacuna here is this continued assumption. And you deal with it in the book. I mean, you actually point this assumption out. And Christians have this assumption that technology is inherently neutral. and that we just decide how to use it either morally or immorally. And in many ways, this whole book is a challenge to that assumption that technology is neutral. You actually kind of say technology has a shape to it. It's got a moral character or a built-in set of assumptions that directs us toward a certain way of looking at the world. Can you explain that? Because I think many Christians will hear me say technology is neutral and go, yeah, right, that's correct.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fundamental observation, I think, from scripture is that, first of all, the created world has kind of an intrinsic power. We were created from physical dust. We are created to inhabit a physical world. God is a God of reality and a God of embodiment. We are, the C.S. Lewis quote that's actually a fake quote, "You're not a body, you're a soul that has a body." That's not true. Theologically, is that God created us with bodies, and eschatologically, there's embodiment at not only the beginning of our life, but at the end of time, right? So we'll be in glorified bodies. So the idea there is that we are intrinsically kind of embodied people, and the internet kind of represents to many people as simply kind of a new way to do something. So like instead of going into the restaurant drive-through, instead of going to the movie rental place, stream it. So the tendency is to think that, well, the internet is simply expediting this process that's already happening. It's just kind of a new flavor or a new style, a new way to do it. But I think what the Bible would have us understand is that any kind of language habitat, and Nicholas Carr is who brings the language of kind of intellectual technology. By that, he means the difference between a screwdriver and the difference between the internet is that the screwdriver doesn't actually change your thought patterns. The screwdriver doesn't actually give you kind of a new way to communicate and to learn. The internet does. And so the internet is an intellectual technology. So when you have an intellectual technology, the power of that intellectual technology to actually commend certain things to your soul is there. And it's there whether the result is good or the result is bad. So a jet engine, this is Marshall McLuhan's famous example in Understanding Media, the jet engine creates a world where you should be able to fly to the East Coast from the West Coast in just a number of hours. It creates the plausibility, and the railroad did the same thing. It creates this plausibility of, yeah, you should be able to get to this place. Even if you live here, you should be able to go here in just a few hours. I'm nowhere in the book do I say that that's immoral or a problem, but it is a different kind of world. It shapes us in a particular way, and it creates this sense of this is what life should be like. And so the internet is the same exact way. The internet is this technology, and especially because it's an intellectual technology, the kind of world that it makes plausible is tied to our sense of who we are, of who God is, of what truth is, and of the kind of people that we are, and the way the world really is. So when we say technology is not neutral, that's not to say that technology is inherently immoral. We're simply saying that technology has a thumbprint, and that thumbprint is left on every area of life, because now there is no such thing. And I think it's McLuhan who makes this point, or maybe it's Postman, I can't remember. There is no such thing as a non-railroad world. There is no such thing as a non-jet airplane world. Like that kind of world is created. It's here. The logic of that is not going away. There's no such thing as a pre-internet world anymore. And so that's simply what I mean by the internet is not neutral.
A lot of what you do is reapply or update some of the insights that Neil Postman has in Amusing Ourselves to Death, which is primarily about television, right, to this new medium of the internet. Could you kind of give us a crash course on what it is he does there? Because I've talked about and written about that book for a long time, but his insights about the way television changed the way people think are still underappreciated. And as you said, they're
Yes,
enormously applicable to the internet.
absolutely. So I think Amusing Ourselves to Death, one of the observations that he makes in that book that just kind of blew my mind and really kind of set me on the trajectory that ended up in the book was that television is, as a production medium, it has to stage the world, right? So television, you have to have a set, you have to have lights, you have to have music. And this was Postman's complaint with TV news, right? That the idea that you're cheapening intellectual discourse because you have to, as soon as you move onto TV, you have to make it a mode of entertainment. You have to keep the audience's attention with flashy little manipulations of their attention. But what Postman said was, so you stage the world on the production side of TV. When people watch that, they get a sense of how the world is supposed to look. And so in that way, TV restages the world. So, the example, if you can think of any kind of sitcom, Seinfeld really popularized the idea of like most of the scenes are going to take place in this one apartment with like, the off-screen bedroom and bathroom. And, you just think of the way that's staged. Well, so someone watching Seinfeld or a sitcom like that, imagine someone watching that at like 7 or 8 or 9 years old. You are seeing what you think life actually looks like.
Right.
You're seeing that on the television and you're saying, that's what life should look like. I should live in that kind of apartment. My friends should always be coming and going in that apartment. Life should feel this way. It should look this way. It should have that kind of vibe going for it. And so in that way, Postman says TV restages the world. It gives us a sense that, hey, if we're being really serious and like not breaking it up with humor every 20 seconds, something's wrong. Why? Because that's what television does. If we're not kind of living in this super active kind of hive of, always constantly joking with our friends and just kind of this carefree life, something's wrong. Why? Because that's what TV presents to us. TV restages the world, showing us what life could be like and should be like as we immerse ourselves in its narratives.
So the internet now does something that's
Yes.
It's not the same as what TV does, but it's in many ways more immersive, more intensive. And this is where I think we need to really establish the premise of the book. I think this will be eye-opening for so many people. What is it that happens when we log into the internet? Let's say one of the big social media sites over the last few years, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. What assumptions are we buying into about the way the world is that are analogous to those assumptions that you buy into as you watch a sitcom? And how do you know they're not true? So in other words, identify the the premise that we're accepting immediately without knowing it.
That's a great question. So imagine someone kind of discovering the internet for the first time and kind of like taking a tour of what it's like to be on social media. Whether this person has, a great deal of real life experience or whether they're, 6, 7 years old, this person discovers social media. How do people perceive them? How do people see them? Well, the answer is that people can only see or perceive them through the things they choose to share, right? Because on the internet, you only exist as content. That's what disembodiment means, right? If you and I are in the same room, then no matter, I could choose to say a lot, I could choose to say nothing, but I'm there in front of you. I can't hide. I can't hide who I am. I can't hide my body language. I can't hide a significant sense of who I am from you in that moment because we're both embodied together.
And there's no profile picture you're presenting to me.
And there's no profile picture.
I look over and I see your actual face, whether whether you're making a dashing winning expression like you want in your profile picture, or you're just like sitting there drooling or something.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
The real you.
Exactly. It's the real me. On social media, the situation is completely different. I can choose the best profile picture of me to take. I can edit it so that it looks like what I think. Talk about restaging the world. I can change it to where it looks like how I think I should look like. And then whatever you know about me is entirely dependent on what I choose to share. If I tell you I'm having a hard day on social media, that's the kind of person I am that day to you. If I tell you that I am very accomplished and very productive that day, that's the type of person I am to you. I am controlling my self-revelation to you because I can mediate everything through this technology that's waiting on me to produce content. And so the lie there is really the fundamental lie of human existence. I'm God. Because what's true of God? God can only be known through self-revelation. You and I, we're not that way because people know us. You and I were born to people before we chose to give ourselves to somebody else. We were given to someone again with no voluntary power of our own. But God can only be known through what he chooses to share. And so the self-revelatory aspect of social media is in fact a digital liturgy that reinforces to us this sense of godlike control over who we are and over our relationships. And one way this manifests is in cancel culture. So I don't think cancel culture and the internet are the exact same thing, but I do think that if you have this godlike sense of I should be able to control how people perceive me through this technology, then it kind of reverts in the opposite direction as well. I should only be able to see that which I choose to see, that which will make me comfortable, that which will confirm the kind of person that I am. And if there's something on my screen, my literal screen or my screen of life, the kind of school that I'm at, the kind of institution I'm at, the kind of job that I'm at, if there's something on my existential screen that I don't like, I should be able to close that window, to mute that account, to delete that thought, because that's how I'm habituated. That's how the world has been restaged for me. So I think that's one big one that I talk about in the book, and one that has continuing relevance for especially people of our generation.
I want to get to the liturgies that you identify, the digital liturgies. But before we do that, I think there is some more important groundwork to lay, because there are eye-opening moments. One of the moments that really caused me to kind of look up from the book and reconsider my life choices is this idea that the internet is built on a philosophy of transhumanism that actually defies the kind of givenness that you're talking about. The fact that the names that we're seeing on the screens here were names that we didn't choose. They were given to us by our parents, and they harken back to a legacy. I assume you haven't changed your name. They harken back to a legacy that predates us and that we had nothing to do with. Our bodies are given to us. We didn't choose them. We didn't sculpt them. We didn't create them in a sort of avatar building sub game, like at the beginning of a Wii or something. Like you didn't build that. You didn't choose your eye color. You didn't choose anything about yourself, really. So we have a givenness to reality. Explain for us this idea, or this proposal that something about the internet is intrinsically transhumanist.
Yeah. So if you read kind of the history of the internet, where it came from, how it developed, the kind of people that were kind of on the ground level, it's a really fascinating thing. And a very important part of that history is kind of the 1960s and 70s counterculture. So there was this kind of movement of technologically minded, very brilliant, kind of geeky computer heads. Steve Jobs was one of them, who kind of took refuge in the West Coast. And the two things kind of occupying their mind were, how do we build computer systems? How do we kind of, construct these products? But then also, how can we kind of move human civilization toward a kind of secular singularity? Like, how can we kind of grow out of the limitations of our consciousness? And the key text for this movement was a product called the Whole Earth Catalog. And I talk about that in the book, how the Whole Earth Catalog was this part product catalog, part religious tract for kind of this spiritual counterculture, this combination of kind of hippie sensibilities with technological prowess. And so the whole idea here was that if we can construct this machine technology and we can infuse it with enough sophistication, and the language of artificial intelligence really starts to develop kind of along the inheritors of this particular movement. If we can kind of infuse it with enough sophistication, then this technology will help us to overcome limitations of our body, limitations of our knowledge, limitations of our physical presence. Like, we're going to be able to kind of treat the world, all of existence, as this massive kind of PDF download that we can kind of infuse into ourselves. And so that we don't have to worry about aging. We don't have to worry about not having access to the right material. We can kind of just consume the world from our own vantage point. So the history of the internet kind of emerges from that setting. And what we see is that when we consider especially the web, and some people get hung up on the difference, what's the difference between the internet and the web? The internet just refers to the networking technology, right? So you can have literally only two computers connected to each other, and that's technically the internet. But the World Wide Web is kind of what's in view here, this kind of informational and social ecosystem that's created by millions of people and thousands of devices. So the World Wide Web in particular has this kind of logic to it, because the people who constructed and laid the groundwork for it believed that the goal of this technology was to help us overcome our humanness. Our humanness is a problem. And the transhumanist worldview, which was very present in the Whole Earth Catalog and reflected in some of the sentiments of people like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, the transhumanist logic was that technology can help us to basically not be human anymore. We can become pure consciousness with the help of this technology. And so the World Wide Web has on it a kind of I've used this metaphor before, but like a thumbprint. It has the thumbprint of kind of this transhumanist sensibility. And actually, Shane, I think this partially explains the dominance of the algorithm in our life. So the idea is, from music to tweets or X's or whatever they're called.
Posts now. It just
posts.
Post.
I guess posts. Yeah. Anyway.
Original.
Yeah, super original. So from social media to music to movies, the algorithm drives our attention into particular places. I think you and I have talked about how, like, web design in the 90s and the early 2000s, it maximized search and navigation. Whereas now web design pushes the audience toward a particular place on the page. I think that is part of the inheritance of transhumanist ideology, the idea that this powerful algorithm knows what people need better than they know. And so all we need to do is to connect people with this technology, and they will flourish even despite their intentions. And I think from a Christian perspective, we should have serious concerns about that.
There's something that happens to me, and I've noticed, and this also makes me question my life choices. So, I'm in this constant cycle of, oh my goodness, what am I doing to myself? Which I think is probably healthy at this point with the technology we have access to. But I have this thing that happens to me where I get to a weekend or I get to a vacation with my family, and I start to just naturally, not even intentionally, I start to put the apps down, put the phone down. I stop spending time on the internet, and I zoom into where I'm at, and I just live right there. It's almost a sensation of my soul coming back to my body, or my mind coming back to my body. So I'm no longer trying to be omnipresent. I'm no longer curating this omnipresent identity that is disembodied and out there, mixing it up with people, arguing, writing, thinking, posting, giving impressions or takes on everything that happens in the news, right? I'm actually a dude who lives in a place and has people around him and is primarily concerned with what's actually going on within earshot and eyesight. Right. And that's a very different experience. I think people will know what I'm talking about when I say that. And it's not just a quirk of my mind. At least I hope so. But
not at all.
The experience of being back in my body is entirely more pleasant and fulfilling than the experience of trying to be a disembodied self. And when I say that, it makes me, and I hear what you're saying, it makes me wonder whether we can say this is morally neutral in some sense, or whether we can even engage with it without being terrified of the transhumanist implications that are being pushed on us. What are you saying? We should just like run from this thing? Because what you're describing is very scary and inhuman.
Yeah, I think at one level, I certainly agree with that. It is scary. It is inhuman. It's inhumane. In fact, the book mentions, Andrew Sullivan's essay, which he titled, "I used to be a human being." So literally there's an anti-human element in all of this. And I identify with what you described in terms of, like, when I'm out on vacation or when I just unplug for a weekend, I can feel a restoration of my soul. And it actually feels a lot like Sabbath. Like, it feels a lot like, okay, this is what genuine rest is. This is what genuine Sabbath feels like, which makes me think that, and I haven't quite answered your question yet, but this makes me think that part of the issue is that the way we're living online is actually work. We're actually laboring for no reward. We're not working the ground that we're made from in order to produce something that can fill the earth and we can subdue it to the glory of God and to the betterment of his people. We're just laboring. We're just hamsters in a wheel. And so when we get off the wheel, even if it's for a day or a weekend, we feel kind of this restoration of our mind. So to that end, the question is, like, okay, well, why should I even have the internet at all? Like, why can't I just throw out my machines? Well, here's what I would say to that. One, McLuhan and Postman's observations were not necessarily that the world needed to completely reject the television or the railroad or the jet engine. Their observations, in fact, were kind of against that because they said, this is the kind of world we have now. Like there's no going backward because philosophically speaking, once these plausibility structures are in place, you can't get rid of them. People now think in terms of television and jet travel and the railroad and the internet now. So to be realistic and to be philosophically cogent, we have to acknowledge that kind of plausibility structure is here to stay. So the question, I think, is how does that guide our individual choices, first of all, and how does it guide how we kind of counsel each other? So individually, I actually think there are some web technologies that we need to be very skeptical of, particularly web technologies that seem very addictive and very immersive to our attention spans. I think we need to be very careful about any technology that kind of holds with it this promise of relief from our loneliness, from our insecurity, from our sense of not really knowing who we are. And there's a lot of these. So I use one example of the book of, YouTube reaction videos and how reaction videos are simulating the experience of friendship. Because what do you do when you go to a movie with your friends? You don't just watch the movie, you watch them watch the movie. And that's part of the reward of it, right? The reaction video is and in fact, a lot of influencer content kind of simulates friendship. Every influencer starts every video with, "Hey guys," it's that very congenial sense of oh, you're my friend. And in fact, you're not their friend. And if you tried to act like their friend in a very meaningful way, if you just ran across them, they would probably call the police. And that's the way the world is being staged now. So I think we should be very, very careful of expressions of the internet that make explicit plays on what it means to be human. I think we need to hold each other accountable. So I actually don't know my Twitter password. My wife does. And so I have to log off and then ask for her to log me back in. And that creates this, not only this obviously accountability, I have to get her in the know, but also if I'm going overboard, she kind of knows because she's like, yeah, you haven't asked for your password in 2 months. And I saw on your page that you're averaging probably 10 tweets a day. You probably need a break. This sense of she actually can see what I do. And because she's not immersed in this world the same way that I am, she can pull me out of it. And I think that's what we need, Shane. I think that's what we need in terms of our friendships, in terms of our relationships. We need to pull each other out of the fog. That requires rejecting one of the internet's primary values, and that's privacy. So we have to reject the value of privacy. I don't mean privacy with the government. I mean privacy with each other, with people who are closest to us. We need lots of privacy from the government, but we don't. In fact, it's the opposite. The situation that we're in is the opposite. The government knows everything that we're doing. Our spouses don't.
Yeah.
It needs to be the opposite. The people closest to us need to be able to tell where we're falling into these patterns and to have the power in our lives to bring us out. And I honestly think that in a technological world where we're not going to put the computer back in Pandora's box, we're not going to get rid of it. I think that's kind of what the essence of what the Lord's calling us to do is to understand the effect that these technologies have and then preach the gospel of the real embodied physical love your neighbor, go to church gospel to each other in a way that helps each other see through this fog.
This is super good stuff. I'm talking today with Samuel James about the way the internet has reshaped our minds and souls and what we can do about it. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Hi, this is Shane Morris. Suicide has become an epidemic, and the church has a vital role to play in fighting against it. Our next Lighthouse Voices event on September 5th will help you better understand what that role looks like. Our speaker for this event is Dr. Matthew Sleeth, author of Hope Always, How to Be a Force for Life in a Culture of Suicide. He'll help us understand what's behind the current epidemic and what Christians can do to fight suicide and care for those who are struggling. Tickets are available for both in-person and online attendance. You can register today at colsoncenter.org/lighthousevoices. We're back on Upstream talking with Samuel James about his new book, Digital Liturgies. Samuel, the title itself raises a question, and I think we're at the point in the discussion where we need to explain that. What do you mean by a digital liturgy? Why that phrase? And then we'll get into some of the liturgies you talk about in the book.
So, the way I'm understanding the word liturgy, and particularly the way it's used in Christian worship language, is that a liturgy is kind of this set of practices, right? So, you go into church, and the church's liturgy is basically its order of worship. So, the order of worship commences with a call to worship. You read a scripture kind of calling your attention to who God is, a prayer of confession. The congregation kind of joins in one in a prayer of confessing their sins, a promise of absolution or a promise of atonement, of forgiveness. Another scripture passage is read to the congregation. So anyway, and then there's singing and prayer and the sermon. I don't want to get angry emails from Reformed Protestants saying, you didn't mention preaching when you talked about liturgy. Yes, preaching is the central act of the liturgy. I affirm that.
Those Reformed folks.
I know, man. Anyway, so you have a liturgy, and that liturgy exists not to provide you instant transformation. If you go to church asking for instant transformation, you're going to be really frustrated because it doesn't work that way. The liturgy exists to drive truth down deep into your heart, one practice, 1 week at a time. And so it's not that one service or 2 services has just like a vision on the mountain experience on you. It's that week after week, month after month, year after year, this particular set of practices actually drives down a belief and a plausibility about the gospel deep into your heart. It changes you because you enter in repeatedly to this language and behavioral ecosphere which says the gospel is real, God is real, sin is real, Jesus is real, the church is real. And so that just drives truth down deep into your heart. And, James K. Smith in his book, You Are What You Love, and then his Cultural Liturgies trilogy, he uses the example of the shopping mall. The shopping mall is a secular liturgy. Why? Because it uses the same set of practices. So looking through the window, paying at the counter, the music that's coming in, the language that you use with the employees, all of this is suggestive that this is the good life. That if you own this product, you will be happier, you'll be sexier, you'll be more loved if you do this. That's the mall's liturgy. The church's liturgy is completely different. But the question is not, does one place have a liturgy and one place doesn't? They both do, but they're competitive liturgies. They're liturgies set against each other. So the question I had when I started the book was, what are the sets of practices? What are the sets of ideas and behaviors that the internet as a habitat presents to us that makes counter gospel more plausible to our hearts and minds? And that's where I came up with the 5.
Okay, so some of these 5 are actually fairly surprising. I think 1 or 2 of them strike you as, yes, this is obviously true about the internet, but some of them just make you go, oh, hang on, I never thought about that. I never realized that was something that was happening in my heart and mind as I logged onto social media. So the first one is this authenticity liturgy. And this is probably the deepest, darkest, down in the basement, but most pervasive thing that affects our modern life, especially life online. And you summarize it with this phrase, my story, my truth. What do you mean by that? And where do we see that? Especially my favorite example is the product reviews. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. So my story, my truth, it just captures kind of where authority is located on the internet. So if you have this disembodied kind of social habitat and you have kind of the removal of the typical human institutions that we construct to confer things like expertise or authority in the life of another person, if those don't exist and the internet is kind of presented as this radically egalitarian space, which it often is presented that way, even if it's not technically that, where does authority come from? What's true? What's our epistemology? How can we determine what's true? And what you find as you kind of dig into the weeds of social media is that on social media, it's not so much the people with the most experience or the best arguments or even the most coherent explanations. Those are not necessarily the people who are to be believed. It's the people with the most compelling story. So if you've got someone who has a truth claim over here, and you've got another person who says, well, somebody who believes what you believe treated me really poorly one time. Guess who wins? It's the person with the story. Because right now, that person with the truth claim can't compete with that person's lived experience. They can't say, oh, that didn't happen to you, or, well, this belief is not tied to your experience of it. They can't say that. Why? Because socially, at that moment, everyone's agreed that this person's experience is kind of the most real, the most authoritative thing. It's kind of the control category for online discourse. And so I use the example of the customer review. I can't remember if I called it the Yelp effect or not, but I wanted to call it the Yelp effect. So the customer review on Amazon has kind of created this, and not just Amazon, but like everywhere. The customer review has created this kind of epistemological way of approaching the world that is actually really radical when you think about it. It's kind of insane that anybody can say whatever they want about anything else and get it published so that anyone, including hundreds of thousands or millions of people, can see it.
Yep.
And do you know how many authenticity counters you have to go through to, like, how many checks on whether your experience is truthful or whether you're telling the truth or not? You know how many checks you have to go through in order to post that review? Zero. You can just say it. You can say, I went into this restaurant and the waiter held a gun to my head, said, you are the worst person I've ever seen. You are uglier than dirt. Get out of here. You're not getting any food. 1 star.
Yeah.
Like you can say that.
One time this is one of my lowest moments, but I will confess, it's been a few years. One time I wrote a review after a negative experience with this realtor who was sort of showing us around apartments in the DC area for my family. And she kind of pulled the rug out from under us. I was really upset. My wife ended up crying about the whole experience. We'd spent some money that we were never going to get back, in the application process. And so I went on review sites and I wrote I would say highly crafted and artful negative review that I was, attempting to put some satire in there as well, but for there to be a lot of sting. End of the story is that she threatened to sue me over that review. So,
Wow.
so I finally took it down to just preserve the peace, even though I doubt she'd have a case. But yeah, it felt good. It was very cathartic to sort of take that out there. And I know exactly what you're talking about. So that there's no checks on it.
Yeah, there's no checks on it. And even if the experience, so like in your case and in many other cases, the experience really was negative. And so there's a legitimacy to being able to tell other people, hey, my experience at this wasn't good. You might want to be careful. It's totally legitimate. We're more interested in kind of the epistemological implications of this. Like, this is radical. This is incredible. And so when you're confronted with the internet as kind of this way of experiencing the world, which is what I talk about in the book, how people can go to school, go to church, they can date and meet other people without leaving their living room, so that the internet has kind of become this immersive all-in experience of life. The customer review becomes this almost priesthood of expertise. So what do you do when you are thinking about buying a product? You go to the customer reviews. What do you do when you're thinking about hiring someone to do a personal service for you? You look instinctively at the customer reviews. That's just how we're wired now. And so that right there signals that on the internet, the personal experience, the personal narrative has become authoritative in a way that really nothing else can.
The next liturgy is about outrage, and this one struck home for me because I've had the exact experience you describe in the opening of the chapter numerous times, and sometimes I've been the other guy where people have said, we'll back up and tell the story in a second here, but give us the outline of the outrage liturgy. What's happening here, and how does it turn us into different people on the internet?
Yeah. So there's many things at work here. And one of the things Nicholas Carr does really well in The Shallows and kind of articulates really well is that reading online, so hypertext, the kind of textual experience that's available on a computer, actually has a much different and qualitatively different imprint on the mind. And our minds experience it much differently than we do analog reading. So reading a newspaper, reading a book, that sort of thing. The experience of reading online, the experience of reading on a computer is cognitively less attentive and cognitively more distracted and knee-jerk than reading offline. And he's got study after study in the shallows, kind of these experiments that were done on readers to kind of see who could remember what they read more and who had a more sensible response to what they read more. Was it the people who read it on the book or the paper, or the people who read it on the computer? And the conclusion they come to is that clearly there's an effect that the medium has on how we comprehend this. And so if we're saying that rationality has kind of been sidelined and the emotional thinking and kind of reactive thinking is kind of the dominant mode online, well, what's the most rewarded emotional reaction? It's anger.
Right.
Anger is what elicits people to actually do something, to actually post, to actually consume content. And this is why engineers, so like people who work on algorithms and social media, will say, oh yeah, we designed the algorithm to reward the most outrageous links and the most outrageous posts because that's what hooks people. Yeah, that's what makes sense. It's that particular emotion that rises to the top in the online ecosystem. And so that's how outrage gets perpetuated online.
The story you tell, I think many people will recognize themselves in it. It's of seeing somebody in a coffee shop who had blocked you on Twitter and trying not to, make eye contact. The guy ends up recognizing you, comes over and says hi, and is apparently glad to see you, like nothing had happened.
Yeah.
Which is very odd since he had you blocked on Twitter and kept you blocked after that point, after some sort of nasty disagreement. And I identify with this because a lot of people, and this is just a moment of candor, but a lot of people have told me that for several years I came across as much more abrasive on the internet, social media, than I do in person. Like that in person, I'm actually a nice person to be around. Like I'm fun and generous, and I'm not characterized by outrage and dismissiveness, but I was characterized by outrage and dismissiveness and sarcasm on the internet for a while. And many people close to me just ask, is that really what you want to put across? Like, who's the real you? Is it the one you're putting on the internet, or is it the one you behave like in person? Because in person, that seems like the real you. And why would you want to deceive people? And that's when you have to reckon with the fact that you are being shaped by that algorithm. And it's not like there's some, little trolls somewhere in a control room to going that we can get Shane or Samuel to be a jerk today on the internet. It's literally that. There may be some nefarious content or intent somewhere back there, but it really is just that outrage is powerful, and the algorithm doesn't know anything. All it knows is maximize engagement with posts, and it figures out statistically that the posts that get the most engagement, right? This is the social dilemma. This is the whole that whole documentary. The posts that get the most engagement are the ones that make people mad. And so those rise to the top. And it's just this endless cycle. Now, I think some of the platforms have actually taken steps to minimize this. I think Facebook, for example, even though it's in its senescence, it's sort of descending in relevance as a platform, I remarked that it's become more wholesome and less blood pressure spiking in recent years, because it's like I'm seeing more of people's kids and their vacations and like funny memes and stuff. It's like more like the Facebook of 2007 and 8 than it has been in a very long time. And that's nice. And of course, Twitter is undergoing changes as well. But yeah, that hit home for me, man. That is exactly the truth. It changes you, turns you into two different people.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. And I've seen this own effect in my life. And I tell that story not to heap scorn on that particular person. Actually, the point of telling that story was we almost all have been that person. And so it's, to see it from the other side, from another person's perspective, and how jarring that can be. And I've had to come to grips with, when I'm kind of in my online self, am I trying to project that I'm really, really smart at the expense of being humble and saying, hey, I don't know much about this, or I don't really need an opinion about this because I haven't done the research? Am I feeling pressure? And I would not necessarily stand up in the middle of my church or the middle of my school and say, hey, I have an opinion about random XYZ event. So much of what passes for like really persuasive and appealing online behavior, if you did it in the offline world with people that actually could see you and know you, you'd be branded a sociopath.
Or punched in the face.
Or even worse. And so that's an example that when it comes to the internet, we are dealing with a habitat that makes certain things plausible. And so, people will ask, is the offline me, the real me? Is the online me real me? And I go, yes. Like the answer is yes. Both of you are the real you. It's just that one particular environment brings out what's in your heart because it makes it more plausible, and the other environment does the exact same thing. So we have to reckon with that. And that's a big deal for Christians as well, to realize that, I say in the book that anger is a powerful epistemological fog. And what I mean by that is that anger makes it very difficult to be wise. When you're angry, when you feel the rush of blood, when you feel kind of the seething, kind of biting need to fight back and to get back and to talk back, that really clouds your rational judgment like very few other things will. And we intuitively sense this in our relationships, right? In our marriages, in our parenting, and our relationships with coworkers, we sense that this is true. Online, because anger is so algorithmically rewarded, it becomes much harder to see.
That anger leads right into the next liturgy. It leads millions of people to participate ritually in the next liturgy, and that is shame. That's the shame on you mentality. And this brings up, I guess this is the assumption that you confront here. For all my life growing up as a Christian, I was warned again and again that the big problem with our culture was relativism, moral relativism, that anything goes and morality was no longer black and white. It was just you do you, your truth is your truth. But you actually make the case in this chapter that that's dead, that's gone. We're not a morally relativistic culture anymore, that we're actually highly moralistic. What does that have to do with the shame liturgy, and how does that liturgy work?
Maybe the classic example of a shame culture that most people will recognize is, the book, The Scarlet Letter. So the Puritan New England, I think it was in New England, this Puritan culture that holds this woman up for public shaming because of her sin, brands her so that she can never be anything other than an A. Like, you are this is who you are this forever, and this is how we're going to relate to you forever. So people associate that with religion, and they associate that with, Christianity, unfortunately. What's interesting is that if you look at kind of what's going on in the halls of higher education, in pop culture, there's a very secular shame culture at work in our society at pretty much every level. And I think the internet is a key part of that. And we've talked a little bit about that previously in the episode. But I think one thing that people need to keep in mind is that the internet simply shows you pictures and text of people, so that when you decide that this person is canceled, or when you decide to get rid of this person, you have no personal investment in that person again. Like, you can't come alongside that person and try to help them repent. You can't come alongside that person and help them try to be restored. Online shaming is like church discipline, but without any restorative element. And that's the whole purpose of church discipline, according to Scripture. Jesus said, go to your brother, and if he listens to you, you've won your brother. That's the point, is to win your brother back. In the internet, the point is to purify the mass and say, we feel impure because you're here and we disapprove of what you said or what you did. And as long as you're here, you're a blight on kind of this online mob. And so you need to leave in order to purify this group. And that honestly sounds like a religion. It sounds like a cult. It's this kind of cult of performative morality that we see all over the internet.
And it's never like, okay, this opinion is moderately bad. It could open up into some problematic associations. It's like, no, this right here, we've just kicked over the anthill, baby.
Right.
This is the beating heart of evil right here. This is the worst person, and this is the ideological core from which everything that we hate emerges. And that's why we have to destroy this person right here.
Yes. I love the meme with the robot spider with the laser eyes, like that. Like, it's what evokes that. Yeah. So just all over the internet, you see examples of people saying, this is how we got Trump. That's the go-to line. And it's like, it's like people who think that way think that there's nothing worse you can say about something than this is how we got Trump. And that's just, of course, nonsensical.
There are the whole book's drawing the line from cowboy shows on TV with my grandparents' generation to Donald Trump. I mean, like, there's a line right there, apparently.
Yeah. When I didn't know when I was watching, the Fighting Seabees back as a 9-year-old on TV that I was setting the stage for Donald Trump to become president of the
You
United
were,
States.
yes.
Oh man, this needs to be like a Joe Rogan like director's cut, where
There
we're
you go.
just like smoking cigars and talking about uh, Jesus and John Wayne. Anyway,
Exactly.
So anyway, I forget where we were, but so we're talking about just kind of like how everything is terrible online. Like if you offend kind of public sensibility in some way, and it has to be a sensibility that is particularly cared for. So there's a lot of hypocrisy, right, with online shame culture, because people who will do certain things get no such treatment, and people who do other things will get a lot of such treatment. It's a moral facade, this kind of morality that's mediated online, and it's contradicted in the New Testament, because the New Testament gives us that the purpose of confronting someone in their sin is to see them repent, to see them come back to the truth, to see forgiveness extended. It's judgment without salvation, basically, online.
I love that haunting line you have in there about how at the back of our minds, everyone who's ever participated in an internet mob or a shaming rush has this little voice that says, "Oh no, what if I'm next? What if I'm the person whose secrets and skeletons they discover and decide to drag across Twitter and destroy my career? What if I say something that gets the attention of the wrong people and boom?" I mean, I think there was a Twitter controversy earlier this year that happened in kind of the Christian writing and publishing world, and we don't need to get into specifics, but this controversy to me illustrated so much of what we're talking about here. And actually, I had several kind of fellow people in ministry email me afterwards privately and say, "I'm more frightened to say what I think are true things now, regardless of what you felt about this particular author and what he said. I'm more frightened to say true things now as a result of this. I'm more nihilistic about the state of discourse." It just had a chilling effect, in other words, on people who were otherwise willing to think deeply and speak the truth, even in goodwill, not in any sense of malice or with any intent to offend or shock or hurt. Just people with goodwill are saying, "I'm going to shut up now because of this." And that's exactly the effect I don't think we want to have.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you hear people justify this by saying, "Well, we're just speaking truth to power. We're holding a power accountable." In 99% of cases, it's not power. You're trying to hold accountable this person who has as much access to the reins of power as you do. And power is defined very watery in this sense, to just mean somebody who says something that I don't like. That goes back to what we were talking about earlier with when you learn to experience the world through the computer, you get this sense that whatever discomforts me, whatever I dislike, I should be able to get rid of, or else something is broken, something is wrong.
Okay, so we've got 2 liturgies left, and because we're just doing a podcast and we're not going to spoil the whole book for folks, we'll leave some of this to be filled in by reading. But the 2 remaining liturgies are the consumption liturgy and the meaninglessness liturgy. So the first has to do with pornography, second has to do with distraction, discontentment, dislocation. I want you to pick which one we hit here at the end, because they're both great. Obviously, a discussion about the internet hardly seems complete without a discussion on pornography. But tell me which one you want to talk about.
I'm fine to do that one. Yeah, that's fine.
It's called Naked in the Dark, or that's the subtitle you attach to it, a reference to Return of the King and something Frodo says about the ring and its effect on him. You root pornography in something much deeper about the internet, not just plain old lust. And in many ways, this is like central to the thesis of the book, that the internet is not a problem simply because it's a vehicle that gives us pornography. Something about the internet itself is pornographic in shape. That's a claim you make. Big, bold claim. Tell us why you say that.
Yeah, so if we think about what pornography is, so pornography is essentially the taking of something that is experienced between two people and is meant to be a subjective experience, meaning you're supposed to have two subjects entering to this experience together, and it makes it a exhibition. So it makes it something for somebody else to consume. So, as people will know, like real sex, like sex with your spouse, is intimate, but often, funny and awkward. And it's meant to foster intimacy on a number of levels: relational, emotional. And so it's meant to be something that can only be experienced as you are in a covenanted, subjective relationship to it. What pornography does is it says, hey, let's take this covenanted subjective relationship and let's turn it into something that can be consumed and then discarded by another person. And so the taking of life, taking of something that is meant to be lived and turning it into a consumable, that's pretty much the entire internet. That's pretty much the web. So whether we're talking about friendship, like I mentioned earlier in the YouTube videos of people reacting, and like that's turning the experience of friendship into a consumable, or whether it's things that we actually attach the suffix porn to, like earth porn is pictures of beautiful scenery that are meant to be experienced in person, but we've turned that into consumable. Food porn, food that's meant to be tasted and experienced by us as we're sitting at our plate, enjoying this delicious food, giving thanks to God for it, turning that into a consumable photo that we can kind of experience third hand. There's a reason we attach the suffix porn to that. It's because there is a genetic similarity between pornography and those type of seemingly innocuous online experiences.
It's
And
creepily reminiscent of this example that C.S. Lewis gives. I think it's in Mere Christianity, where he's trying to illustrate how messed up our sex drive is. And he says, imagine a world where people gather together in an auditorium for something like a striptease, and somebody slowly lifts the cover off of like a steak dinner. And then just before it's fully revealed, the lights go down. And this is, he's mimicking this sexual thing. He's like, we would think those people were ill in the head.
Yeah.
But he says, that's what we do with sex. Well, guess what, Jack, sorry to tell you this, but that's kind of what we do with food now. Your example has come to life.
Yeah. No, that's such a good illustration. I wish I could have used it in the book. Yeah, that's exactly
second edition.
That's second edition. Yeah, with credit to Shane Morris. Yeah, that's exactly right. So we turn everything into an exhibition. So much of life, and Shane, this goes. Obviously, this is relevant to our experience of pornography, right? So in the book, I kind of end the chapter by talking directly to the experience of pornography because it ties into my life, but also I think a lot of people who struggle with pornography, what their spirit needs, probably even more than accountability, even more than restrictions on their device. And I'm all for accountability, all for restrictions on a device. But what they need is to walk outside. They need to see the sun. They need to actually go live life in the world that God created, to feel gratitude swelling up in their soul again for this beautiful day or this wonderful meal or this amazing vacation with these wonderful people. They need to feel the gratitude of the life that God gave them swell up, because when that happens, the idea of pornography becomes contemptible. It's like, why would I have this beautiful person in my home who cares for our children and is such a hard worker and loves me so sacrificially. Why would I can't turn that into an iPhone. I can't capture that and put that onto a consumable experience. And so I think what our hearts need is to grow. Our souls just need to grow. And for many of us, they've shriveled over the last decade plus to the size of a phone and to the size of a computer screen. And so I think whether there's relevance, either if a particular listener is trapped in a pattern of pornographic use, or whether they're just trapped in internet addiction and it's not necessarily anything that would come up on a accountability report, but it's things that are sucking their soul because they're not living life the way they're supposed to be. They're not out there in God's world with God's people. Their life has shrunk to the size of their screen. So I think that's a liberating message to us all, whether we're struggling on either end of that spectrum.
I think this is going to resonate instinctively with a lot of people when the moment they hear, it's not just the fact that pornography is a nasty thing coming to you through the pipeline of the internet. The pipeline is pornographically shaped. Something about this ritual or set of rituals, liturgies, is shaping you in a pornographic direction. So that even if you manage to avoid pornography addiction, you're going to be forever sort of exposed to analogs to it, and then always vulnerable to creating that addiction because you're already doing the things and thinking in the patterns and living in the ways that make that addiction feel plausible, that make that weird, screwed up, almost like laughable, if it weren't so sad, activity of watching the thing that you're supposed to participate in,
right?
To make that feel plausible. Something's not right there. Okay, so this is the big question, and I know I've set you up for a very difficult answer here. But in many ways, the book is shaped this way too. Like it's not necessarily a book full of practical solutions as much as just a wake-up call to how things really are. And you call yourself a tech realist, right, on the back cover. This is that has overtones of sort of things are bad, guys. Things are really negative. This is I'm just going to wake you up and show you the way the Matrix works. You're not going to like it.
Hey, don't compare me to Andrew Tate, brother.
Okay, sorry, I won't do that. But there is something of a revelation going on here. And throughout the book, you are, I won't say dismissive, but you tend to minimize the power of single practical solutions, like having sacred spaces like Sherry Turkle talks about, or limiting screen time, or filtering apps, or accountability partners. Fine if those things help you, but you caution very strongly against those things being a sort of run-to solution that's going to fix this whole thing. What is your sense of how we as Christians must react to all of this? What does wisdom look like in a world where our devices and our technology are forming us in foolish directions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I hope that people will come away from the book kind of more willing to do these practical suggestions, not less. I hope that the book didn't communicate that I think less of these. Actually, I think accountability is a huge part of the Christian life. And, we use the word accountability, and it's kind of become this like crotchety word that we, I won't say what I was to say, but it's become like this. It's become this kind of like a cringy word. And really, honestly, accountability is just a slang term. It's a bad slang term for friendship, right? So what we're seeking in accountability is actually friendship. We're seeking people to come alongside us and say, hey, like I can tell when you need me to help you. I can tell when you need me to encourage you or pray for you. And that's what I'm going to do for you. So in terms of the practical solutions, I think one reason I didn't make it a more explicitly kind of prescriptive book is that this is going to look different for different people. So if you've got a person who's a social media manager for a company who reads this book, they're going to need a lot of pastoral wisdom. And I'm not about to tell them as some random guy that they need to quit their job and find another career, right? Because I don't necessarily believe that. I think that the Lord could have a lot of ministry for them using that particular technology. We're not going to go back to a world without it. That's absolutely true. So I don't want people to feel like there's a one size fits all here, because people are different. And part of the power of this technology is that it captures us wherever we are. It captures our particular weaknesses, our particular struggles, our particular insecurities. There's almost a sense that the internet has kind of DNA for all of us. Like you can kind of find yourself somewhere online in these liturgies. But I think really where I want to start with people is if we can talk to each other, not text each other, not tweet at each other, but if we can talk to each other about this, and we can open up to each other about where we are particularly tempted and which of these liturgies that we see ourselves and we see each other. And I talk about like a real Christian conversation. Where do you see me falling most often in these liturgies? If we can talk to each other, that right there is a huge part of the ball game, because I think one of the foundational things that the internet does to us is it isolates us. And so the power of these liturgies is immediately cracked open when we find each other again. When we find each other not as avatars that we give self-revelation of, we find each other not as platformed people that we have to kind of interact with that way, but as we find each other as brothers and sisters in the Lord. Hey, I can see you. I can see by your body language you're struggling. I can see by the way you look, you seem really exhausted, or you seem like you don't want to really open up. Is everything okay? Is something going on? Are you struggling? What's going on? If we find each other and talk that way, then these liturgies will become vastly less appealing right off the bat. And so I think the Lord is calling us primarily to finding one another in these embodied relationships. And then there are practical steps we can take beyond that. But I think for a lot of people, that's going to be the first and most important step that they take.
If I can say so, Samuel, it seems like this book is like the first pebble in an avalanche that I suspect is coming, not just from Christians, but from secular thinkers who look back and survey the last 20 years and go, we took a wrong turn, guys. Something was really badly constructed about this internet thing, and a lot of people are suffering and sick because of it now. We need to change the way we do things. It seems like your book will be like one of those early beginnings of the full realization that then comes down on us. And in 20 years, I hope we'll be looking back and saying, yes, the Christians were saying this first, but the secularists got on board and said, oh, we need to construct a more healthy, more humane, more human internet or technological environment. I think we're seeing the beginnings of this. I'm hopeful, but yeah, may Christians be the ones who lead the way. I think your book does a great job with that.
I completely agree. I hope this is just the first, and it's not really the first. There are other people already in this space, guys like Chris Martin and Jay Kim, who are two that just come to mind that have been writing in this space. But what an opportunity, Shane, what an opportunity this is for the church to be the church. Because if the church recovers this, then what people out in the secular world who are burnt out and lonely and isolated and tired of consumption and meaninglessness, what people are going to see is, wait a minute, do you hear the noise coming from that building over there? Do you hear the sound coming from that building? Let's go check that out. That sounds like something we haven't heard. This is a huge opportunity for us as Christians to literally be salt and light just by being people.
My guest today has been Samuel James, author of Digital Liturgies, Rediscovering Christian Wisdom in an Online Age. Sammy, brother, thank you so much for your insights, for writing this book, and for just writing over the years. Your stuff has blessed me, and I know it's going to bless my listeners too.
Thanks, Shane. It's always good to be on here.
Upstream is a program of the Colson Center. When it comes to the hardest questions we ask, we have thousands of years of accumulated wisdom from which to draw, from a faith that is the explanation of all reality. So come upstream and learn to understand the world, the church, and the God who has placed you in them. Be sure to rate the podcast and subscribe in your listening app. You can also connect with us on social media or by visiting upstream.colsoncenter.org.